Okay, let's unpack this truly mind-bending scenario. What if Denmark, the land of Vikings and pastries, decided to, well, buy California?
Huh. Yeah, it sounds completely outlandish, doesn't it?
It really does, like something out of a movie. But stick with me here because this wild idea actually cracks open some really fascinating questions about how the world works.
It absolutely does.
Okay.
I mean, when you play with a concept this unexpected, you're forced to really look at the foundations, the economics, the politics that we usually just sort of take for granted.
Exactly. And that's our mission control for this deep dive. We're jumping to this what if Denmark buying California, all based on a really thought-provoking article.
Right.
And our goal is to understand the economic, political, logistical, cultural ripples of something like this, even if it's pure fantasy. It gives us a surprisingly grounded look at what makes any major global shift so incredibly complex.
Right.
I'll need to dive in.
Let's do it. And I think we have to start with the money, right? The sheer scale.
Oh, absolutely. The economic gap between these two is, well, it's kind of jaw-dropping.
It really is. So California, as of last year, what, GDP over $3.5 trillion?
Yeah, over 3.5 trillion. I mean, put that in perspective. If California were its own country, it's the fifth largest economy on the planet.
It's huge.
Think about what's inside it. Silicon Valley, the heart of tech, Hollywood, the dream factory, and this massive agricultural sector feeding so much of the U.S.
It's a cornerstone, no question. A
Mhm.
huge tax base, infrastructure, just incredibly diverse industry.
Absolutely. A real powerhouse.
Okay, now pivot to Denmark. Very prosperous, very stable country, absolutely. GDP around, what, $400 billion?
Around that, yeah.
So high per capita GDP, definitely wealthy. Strong sectors, shipping, pharma, renewables,
Mhm.
and that famous welfare system underpinning it all.
So, yeah, economically, it's like, I don't know, putting a Mini Cooper next to a freight train.
Something like that. And then you think about the actual price tag for California.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where it gets really wild.
Right, because it's not just the annual output.
Yep.
It's everything. The land, the buildings, the roads, bridges, ports.
All the infrastructure plus the strategic assets,
Yeah.
ports, military bases, things with immense value
Yeah.
beyond just dollars and cents.
So the article we looked at throws out a number, purely speculative, of course,
Highly speculative.
but somewhere in the range of 10 to 20 trillion dollars.
Trillion.
Yeah.
It's a number that's almost impossible to really, truly get your head around.
It really is. So how could Denmark possibly find that kind of money? The article explores a few ideas, like issuing just mountains of bonds.
Right. Bonds, maybe huge international loans, perhaps putting together some kind of global investor consortium.
They even mentioned crowdfunding, which seems ambitious, or public-private partnerships.
It's all technically auctions, I suppose. But let's be realistic. The sheer amount needed,
Yeah.
it just dwarfs any of those mechanisms, really.
Yeah.
The kind of debt Denmark would likely take on, even in the best-case scenario,
Yeah.
it'd be crippling for generations.
Mhm.
It just hammers home that massive financial gulf.
Okay. Right. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, some magic happens. A giant pot of gold appears. The money's there.
Okay, Fantasyland continued.
Then we slam right into this huge political wall. I mean, this isn't like buying a company off the stock market.
Not at all. You're talking about fundamentally changing who governs a massive piece of land and nearly 40 million people.
And the U.S. political system has so many checks and balances, it makes something like this incredibly complicated.
That federal system is key, isn't it? California has a lot of its own power, its own identity, but it's still part of that bigger federal structure.
Right. And the article points to Article 4, Section 3 of the Constitution. That's the part about admitting new states, forming states from existing ones.
And the takeaway is pretty clear. Congress would have to approve any major territorial change like this.
Definitely Congress. But given how huge this is, probably more than just a simple vote, right?
Oh, almost certainly. The article rightly suggests you'd likely need a constitutional amendment.
Which is a really high bar.
A really high bar. Think about it. 2/3 of both the House and the Senate have to agree. Then, 3/4 of all the states have to ratify it.
Wow. Can you imagine trying to get that kind of consensus today on selling California?
It feels,
Yeah.
well, it feels pretty much impossible, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Given the current political climate.
And that's just the federal level. California itself would have a huge say.
Absolutely. You'd almost certainly need the consent of the California state legislature, the governor,
And the people.
and the people themselves. There's such a strong Californian identity, so much pride in the state's culture, its innovation. The idea of becoming part of another country
Even a nice, well-run country like Denmark.
would likely face massive public resistance. Just enormous pushback.
Then you throw in the whole international dimension. This wouldn't just be a quiet deal between Washington and Copenhagen.
No way. The global impact would be massive. Questions of sovereignty, geopolitics, it would be front and center.
Yeah, the U.S. giving up California. I mean, that would send shockwaves, right? It'd be seen as a weakening of U.S. influence, surely. Changing the power balance, especially in the Pacific.
Definitely altering Pacific power dynamics.
Yeah.
And think about Denmark's position. They're a NATO member. How does this play out with their allies?
Especially the U.S. It could put a huge strain on alliances, raise all sorts of awkward questions.
For sure. And you might even see international bodies like the UN getting involved, concerns about self-determination, international law. It really opens up a whole can of worms on the global stage.
Okay, so let's keep dreaming for a second. Money's there, politics somehow resolved. Then we hit this just towering mountain range of logistical challenges. How do you actually merge these totally different systems, different ways of governing, different cultures?
That's a staggering thought, isn't it? Denmark has a unitary parliamentary democracy. Basically, the central government holds most of the power. Strong welfare state.
Right. Very different from the U.S. federal system where power is divided. California has its own constitution, its own laws, a much more mixed approach to healthcare education.
Exactly. And the article gives good examples of clashes. Take healthcare. Denmark, universal, free at the point of service. California, a mix of public and private. How do you suddenly switch that for almost 40 million people?
The disruption would be unbelievable.
Or the legal systems. Denmark uses civil law, mostly based on written codes. California uses common law, relies more on precedent, court decisions.
So it affects everything, right? Property rights, criminal justice.
Everything. Imagine retraining all the lawyers, judges, educating the public on a completely new legal framework. It's monumental.
And then there's just the basic stuff, the nitty-gritty of running things, integrating highways, ports, utilities.
And just the scale. Denmark has, around 6 million people, subtly governing a region with nearly 40 million. Does their administration even have the capacity?
That's a huge leap. Plus, California has unique challenges like water management. That's a constant, complex issue there.
Yeah, and while Denmark is brilliant at coastal engineering, that expertise might not directly translate to California's, drought issues and complex water rights.
It helps sometimes to look back. Are there any historical parallels? The article mentions a few land purchases.
Yes, it does. And they offer some context, but the differences are really stark.
Like the Louisiana Purchase, 1803, U.S. from France.
Right, double the size of the U.S. But key things.
Yeah.
It was between two sovereign nations, and it involved territory that was, frankly, very sparsely populated.
Totally different from a highly developed, densely populated state like California.
Exactly. Or Alaska, bought from Russia in 1867. Again, minimal population, minimal infrastructure at the time.
And the U.S. actually bought the Danish West Indies from Denmark itself back in 1917, now the U.S. Virgin Islands.
Same story, though. Small territory, small population. And crucially, these deals happened in a completely different era. Territorial sales were just more of a thing back then, less politically sensitive.
So those historical examples almost highlight how different this scenario is. We're not talking about empty land.
No, we're talking about absorbing a complex, functioning, modern entity with deep-rooted systems and a very, very strong sense of self.
Which brings us perfectly to maybe the most interesting part, the culture.
Yeah.
What happens when Danish and Californian cultures collide or try to blend?
Yeah, this is where it gets really fascinating. You've got Denmark, known for equality, that concept of hijikosi contentment, sustainability. And then California, incredibly diverse, driven by innovation, individualism, the whole Hollywood ethos.
You can almost picture the clashes and maybe some cool integrations, like maybe LA suddenly gets amazing bike lanes inspired by Copenhagen.
Or perhaps minimalist Danish design starts popping up more in California homes. That could happen.
But then you think about California's car culture, just how central the car is. Or the maybe faster pace of life compared to Denmark. You can see friction points.
Big friction points. Language, too. Sure, lots of Danes speak excellent English, but making Danish an official language alongside English and Spanish in California, that could definitely meet resistance.
Although you could also imagine some cool exchanges. Danish food festivals in Napa, California tech influencing Danish startups.
For sure. There'd be potential for positive cultural exchange, building bridges over time, no doubt.
But digging deeper, what about identity? Autonomy. Californians have immense pride in their state, its role as a global trendsetter.
Becoming part of Denmark.
Yeah.
Well, for many, that could feel like a loss of that unique identity. A real downgrade in status, perhaps.
And for Denmark, how does a nation of 6 million absorb a place nearly 7 times its population, with an economy many times larger, without losing itself?
That's a huge question. How do you maintain your national identity when you suddenly incorporate such a massive, influential entity? It could fundamentally change what it means to be Danish.
Okay, so we've painted a pretty clear picture of the obstacles, massive hurdles. But are there any potential upsides? Any, bright spots in this crazy hypothetical? Let's try and weigh the pros and cons.
Well, looking at it from Denmark's side,
Yeah.
getting a major foothold on the Pacific Rim, that's strategically interesting. Access to Pacific trade, closer to Asia.
True. And the economic boost from California's tech, entertainment, agriculture, that would certainly elevate Denmark's global economic standing.
And like we said, the potential for dynamic cultural exchange could be genuinely enriching.
But then you swing back to the cons for Denmark, that financial burden just seems astronomical.
Absolutely. It's not just the purchase price, it's the ongoing cost of governing California. It could plausibly lead to bankruptcy or just decades of unsustainable debt.
And the administrative overload we talked about. Managing that scale, it's a massive risk for their existing systems, plus the geopolitical fallout, potentially strained alliances.
Big risks. Now flip it. Potential pros for California? Well, maybe access to Denmark's welfare system, universal health care, free higher education, strong social safety nets. That might appeal to some.
And Denmark's focus on sustainability, their expertise in renewables. That could potentially accelerate California's green goal.
Possibly, but the downsides for California seem pretty stark too. Losing autonomy, giving up U.S. statehood and citizenship, that's fundamental.
A massive cultural and political earthquake. Integrating Danish governance, customs, could be very disruptive, maybe alienating.
And the economic uncertainty during such a huge transition could really impact jobs, industries. There's a lot of risk there too.
So when you step back, look at the whole picture, the chance of this actually happening seems vanishingly small, doesn't it?
Incredibly small. The economic gap, the political barriers in the U.S., the huge logistical challenges. It all points to this being, well, firmly in the realm of thought experiments.
Yeah. The article rightly concludes the money alone is likely impossible, and there's just no political will in the U.S. to even consider selling off a state like California.
And the cultural and administrative hurdles just pile on top of that.
But the article does make a great point about more realistic collaboration, right?
Absolutely. Instead of acquisition, think strategic partnerships. Denmark and California working together on trade, on tech, on climate change. That makes a lot more sense.
Things like exchange programs, joint research, sister city agreements, those foster connections without the impossible hurdles of a sale.
And that aligns much better with modern diplomacy, doesn't it? Cooperation, mutual benefit.
Definitely. So what's the value of thinking about something so unlikely?
Well, I think exploring this kind of what if forces you to really grapple with the big things. Economics, sovereignty, governance, culture.
Yeah.
On a global scale.
Yeah, the idea of Denmark buying California, while it's, pretty much impossible, it really highlights just how intricate international relations are.
It shows the importance of national identity, sovereignty, the sheer weight of history and established systems.
Those historical land deals. Interesting, but they show how different today's world is. Deeply connected economies, strong national identities. It makes a deal like this just exceptionally improbable.
So could Denmark buy California? Almost certainly not.
Not in a million years, probably. But exploring why not has been really fascinating, hasn't it? It raises all sorts of questions about power, culture, and how nations interact.
Which leaves a final thought for you, the listener, to maybe mull over. What other seemingly impossible international shifts or collaborations might be worth thinking about, even just as an exercise? What surprising insights could they offer about our interconnected world, and maybe even hint at future possibilities we haven't considered yet?